Survival in the 41st millennium is not a victory. It is a prolonged, agonizing interrogation of the biological form's capacity to endure an eternity of carnage. For the veterans of Krieg's shadow, the act of drawing breath is a daily act of defiance against a cataclysmic universe demanding their immediate erasure. We celebrate the undying champions as venerable beacons of hope. Yet, we deliberately ignore the abyssal spiritual attrition required to outlive every ally in the abattoir. To be the sole remaining conscious entity of 1,000 military campaigns is to become a walking reliquary of the silenced, carrying the crushing weight of ghosts. Kaelen's perceived immortality is not a divine blessing bestowed by the Emperor. It is a mechanical curse, a profound failure of mortality to grant final peace. When organic flesh is systematically replaced by unfeeling adamantium, at what specific moment does a loyal defender cease being human and become merely a processing engine? The enemy does not seek honorable kinetic exchange. They seek psychological desecration, utilizing visceral fear to turn the unformed generations into whimpering husks before the harvest. There is no architectural beauty here. There is only the brutalism of the ditch, structures designed exclusively to be constructed, pulverized, and rebuilt within solar hours. The soil itself is saturated with lethal neurotoxins. Every drop of water is a corrosive entity eager to dissolve the seals of standardized protective equipment. She carries the uploaded psychological profiles of the fallen, a cacophony of screaming tactical logic chips constantly replaying the agonizing trials of previous failed campaigns. Beneath the battlefield, the cycle of existence offers absolutely no respite. The fallen are mechanically repurposed, their genetic vitae feeding the living for the next charge. It is a perfectly closed loop of systemic horror, an abattoir where loyalty is quantified only by the depth of the mud and the resulting biomass. But the ultimate betrayal does not come from the cold calculus of the enemy. It arrives clothed in the blinding, blasphemous white light of fanatic zealotry. A declaration is made. This ruined labyrinth is now designated a holy site of martyrdom, demanding a tribute of crimson to satisfy an archaic clerical mandate. Kaelen's vast experience calculates the outcome instantly. It is not a tactical maneuver. It is a calculated expenditure of human assets disguised as divine religious duty. She no longer remembers the sound of her own voice. She only channels the barking, metallic orders of long-dead officers, directing the innocent toward utter annihilation. The unformed generation pours over the barricades, their lives measured in the pitiful seconds it takes to sprint across a fractured landscape of pulverized concrete. They are met not by soldiers, but by apex predators of twisted iron. The harvest begins, turning the Holy Crusade into a gruesome theater of despair. The ghost limbs of her soul scream in agony with every fallen recruit. The celestial ledger demands more space, hungrily recording the names of the newly erased. Fatigue of the immortal binds her. She is far too efficient a soldier to fail the objective, yet entirely too exhausted to find any solace in victory. Every step forward requires a staggering tribute of crimson upon the soil. The unformed generation spills their genetic vitae to buy mere inches of pulverized concrete. There is no mourning in this purgatory. The fallen simply return to the eternal void, their brief existence a tragically necessary attrition in the eyes of command. The objective shines with a mocking brilliance, a cold, inert sacrament, demanding the calculated expenditure of human assets to satisfy an omniscient, uncaring doctrine. She is a venerable instrument of carnage. The fatigue of the immortal is overridden by hard-coded directives, forcing her broken mind to execute the grim harvest. The mindless bio-machines trudge through the cataclysmic storm, a testament to the surgical desecration required to sustain this planetary-scale abattoir. For a fleeting second, the terrifying apex predator is halted. The sheer, indomitable will of a broken soldier disrupts the flawless mechanical execution of the enemy. The blasphemous prize is secured. The cost was astronomical, an ocean of genetic vitae spilled to retrieve a trinket from the ashes. Then the ultimate cruelty manifests. The clouds part, and a transport descends. The illusion of salvation descends upon the damned. Hope is the most toxic element on Krieg's shadow. It is a fleeting, dangerous hallucination that makes the inevitable return to the mud infinitely more agonizing. The ramp descends not to offer catharsis, but to deliver the next agonizing phase of the eternal cycle. There is no extraction. There is only the arrival of fresh biomass to feed the planetary meat grinder. The ledger demands new entries. New orders are delivered. The mission is not over. It has merely reset. The great cleansing requires her eternal, mechanized servitude. Her survival is merely a logistical asset. She is trapped in a loop of iron and blood, a prisoner of her own unbreakable resilience. The sky closes. The warmth fades. The brutalism of the ditch reclaims its dominion over the damned souls left behind. The apex predators return. The harvest must continue. The universe cares nothing for her spiritual attrition or the screams of her ghost limbs. She must become the monster they need. She must lead another generation into the cataclysmic fire, teaching them how to die efficiently. The voice of heresy and blasphemous zealotry echoes in her mind, commanding a new sacrament of mathematical suicide. She stops moving backward. Her transhuman physiology begins to integrate with the bunker itself. She embraces her tragic legacy as the living gun. Her humanity is carefully excised, an agonizing bioalchemy that turns a grieving veteran into a flawless, unfeeling engine of absolute destruction. The Iron Maiden of the trenches fires into the abyssal dark. Her heart will never stop beating. The war will never end. The unformed generation leaps into the purgatory of no man's land. They are ignorant sacraments, offered blindly to the nihilistic hunger of a cataclysmic war. Her transhuman physiology breached its final boundary, embracing an agonizing bioalchemy. She mechanically anchors herself, becoming entirely indistinguishable from the brutalism of the fortifications. The harvest resumes with terrifying mathematical precision. They spill their genetic vitae upon the ruined earth, a tragically necessary attrition for the omniscient empire. The apex predator performs its surgical desecration. It wears the visceral remnants of the vanquished to broadcast absolute despair across the bleeding front line. Mechanized servitude guarantees the unending kinetic exchange. The lobotomized husks deliver the instruments of annihilation, devoid of any desire for catharsis or peace. The celestial ledger expands its abyssal archives. Every flickering rune represents another mathematical suicide, permanently burned into the neural architecture of the lone survivor. Below the surface, the agonizing bioalchemy completes the cycle. The fallen are mechanically repurposed, their ultimate martyrdom sustaining the machinery of the eternal slaughter. Safe within the sterile command bunkers, the architects of this cataclysmic heresy observe the crimson toll, interpreting the carnage as a venerable display of faith. She does not flinch as the world shatters. She has become a static defense turret, her mind a silent void reacting only to hostile proximity. Her mechanical core refuses to grant catharsis. It forces the ruined vessel to endure, denying the biological right to fail under the crushing attrition. A new solar cycle begins, bringing only fresh atmospheric venom. The brutal environment executes its own relentless war against the fragile defenders. The shattered wooden standard stands resolute, a meaningless relic of vanished ghosts, serving only to mark the epicenter of the agonizing resistance. The Iron Predator identifies the anomaly. It recognizes a spirit as rigidly unyielding as its own metallic framework, an insult to its nihilistic crusade. Her organic gaze holds no terror, only the absolute exhaustion of the immortal. She answers the psychological desecration with a blinding storm of kinetic fury. To the unformed generation, she is a venerable deity of adamantium and wrath, an immortal Iron Maiden born entirely from the mud and the slaughter. Resources are efficiently reallocated without hesitation. Compassion is an archaic, useless emotion, utterly eradicated by the systematic mind-wiping of endless planetary campaigns. She bleeds synthetic sorrow. The fragmented consciousness of 1,000 fallen squadmates screams violently within her tactical neural chips, demanding an impossible silence. The abyssal trench transforms into a monument of defiance, a microscopic victory purchased with a catastrophic tribute of crimson and mechanized servitude. Apex Predator meets the avatar of will. It is a kinetic exchange devoid of honor, a pure mathematical calculation of violent, opposing forces. She is the ultimate manifestation of the great attrition, a tragic hero permanently fused to the war, waiting eternally for the final sanction. She is permanently anchored to the cataclysmic front, a venerable monument of adamantium and shattered flesh, denying the omniscient enemy their final, nihilistic victory. Far removed from the visceral carnage, the architects of this heresy celebrate. They interpret the calculated expenditure of human assets as a divine, blasphemous sacrament. A fresh harvest of unformed generations arrives in purgatory. They seek a savior, finding only an unfeeling engine of destruction, bound entirely to mechanized servitude. The abyssal archives expand infinitely. Every flickering rune is another soul embracing the ultimate martyrdom, their genetic vitae permanently staining the pulverized earth. The apex predator pauses its surgical desecration. It recognizes an anomaly, a biological vessel that actively refuses the catharsis of failure, matching its mechanical hatred. The logistic veins of the trench heavily bleed out. Mindless biomachines are pulverized, their viscera mixed with oxidized iron in a tragically necessary attrition. She is entirely consumed by the agonizing bioalchemy of war. The fatigue of the immortal is heavily drowned out by the deafening roar of absolute annihilation. Subterranean alchemists maintain the eternal loop. The pulverized defenders are stripped of identity, mechanically repurposed to efficiently sustain the very nightmare that ultimately claimed them. Systematic mind-wiping eradicates the heavy burden of compassion. What remains is only the terrifying catatonic clarity actively required to execute the endless, grim harvest. Obedient to the blasphemous clerical mandates, they nervously sprint toward the void. Their brief existence is mathematically calculated to strategically exhaust the enemy's ammunition reserves. The harvest aggressively resumes with devastating speed. The apex predator tears through the fragile human barricade, eagerly spilling their genetic vitae upon the ruined concrete. The shattered wooden relic stubbornly endures the cataclysmic shockwaves. It stands firmly as a tragic, meaningless testament to a vast legion of ghosts forever denied catharsis. The static defense turret forcefully breaks its mechanical tether. The avatar of will steps back into the storm, forcing her transhuman physiology beyond its catastrophic breaking point. Immortal fatigue physically meets ancient, unyielding malice. It is a pure, nihilistic collision of kinetic fury, utterly devoid of any honorable or tactical exchange. The zealot aggressively preaches to the sterile walls, her blinding white light a stark, cruel contrast to the agonizing bioalchemy continuously consuming the loyal defenders. The planetary environment actively aids the slaughter. Toxic precipitation systematically dissolves armor seals, rapidly accelerating the brutal, calculated expenditure of fragile human assets. The failing biological core screams in mechanical protest. Yet, it ruthlessly pumps toxic stimulants, aggressively forcing the ruined flesh to execute its final, violent sacrament. The surgical desecration forcefully pierces her armor, but it cannot breach her hardened spirit. She is far too broken to feel fear, too exhausted to register wounds. In the heart of purgatory, she efficiently delivers her own absolute judgment. A deafening roar of adamantium violently shatters the silence of the abyssal void. The explosion vividly illuminates the planetary-scale meat grinder, a microscopic victory within an eternal war, paid for entirely with a catastrophic, unending tribute of crimson. When the cataclysmic shockwaves subside, the venerable Iron Maiden remains. Her physical form is pulverized, yet her agonizing bioalchemy refuses to embrace the eternal void. The apex predator retreats into the abyssal smog. Its calculated algorithms of mathematical suicide completely fail to predict the indomitable will of the damned. But the omniscient dogma demands swift erasure. The zealot perceives survival as heresy, furiously demanding a fresh tribute of crimson to sanitize the perceived blasphemous delay. Survival is the ultimate transgression within this purgatory. To persist is to actively deny the empire its holy sacrament of mechanized servitude and blind, calculated expenditure. The logistic veins of the slaughterhouse pulse anew. The lobotomized biomachines deliver endless instruments of kinetic fury, completely devoid of any desire for catharsis. The atmospheric venom systematically dissolves the armor seals. Simultaneously, the celestial ledger expands its abyssal archives, permanently burning the mathematical cost into her agonizing consciousness. Below the surface, the agonizing bioalchemy accelerates. The fallen are mechanically repurposed with terrifying speed, their ultimate martyrdom efficiently sustaining the machinery of eternal slaughter. The shattered wooden standard is hoisted once more, a meaningless relic of vanished ghosts, serving only to mark the epicenter of the tragic, unending resistance. The unformed generation trembles within the corrosive earth. They await the inevitable return of the iron harvest, their fragile biological systems failing under extreme psychological devastation. The fragmented consciousness of 1,000 fallen squadmates screams violently within her tactical neural chips. It is a cacophony of ghosts demanding an impossible silence. The apex predators return to execute the grim harvest. The universe cares absolutely nothing for her spiritual attrition or the agonizing screams of her ghost limbs. The ultimate betrayal manifests through blasphemous static. The zealot commands the localized erasure of the trench, casually condemning the loyal defenders to immediate mathematical suicide. Salvation is officially revoked. The Empire delivers its final sanction from the poisoned sky, a cataclysmic rain of oxidized iron meant to cleanse the perceived heresy. The Iron Maiden violently defies the omniscient dogma. She interposes her shattered adamantium frame, actively shielding the unformed generation from the catastrophic, calculated expenditure. The crushing weight of betrayal heavily strikes. Friendly kinetic fury violently obliterates the fortifications, a tragic, localized apocalypse born entirely from clerical fanaticism. The Iron Predator pauses its surgical desecration. It coldly calculates the chaotic self-erasure of the defenders, finding the blasphemous friendly fire highly illogical. She rises from the pulverized concrete. Her transhuman physiology is breached beyond repair, heavily leaking synthetic sorrow into the fiercely corrosive slurry. The abyssal archives critically malfunction. The celestial ledger preemptively records the living as deceased, a terrifying testament to the nihilistic finality of the omniscient empire. For a microscopic second, the agonizing bioalchemy halts. The mechanical core stutters, offering a terrifyingly brief glimpse of the catharsis she eternally seeks. But the heart forces the grim cycle to resume. She redirects her remaining kinetic fury, actively pointing her absolute wrath toward the architects of her perpetual purgatory. The visual link to the omniscient command is forcefully severed. She actively denies the zealots their blasphemous spectacle, fully embracing a profound, localized heresy against the Empire. Within the sterile bunkers, the architects of this purgatory shriek in sheer outrage. The venerable instrument of carnage has aggressively rejected their calculated expenditure of human assets. The apex predator silently observes the schism. Mechanical algorithms rapidly calculate the sudden absence of imperial oversight, recognizing a catastrophic vulnerability in the frontline defenses. She is entirely forsaken, yet absolutely unburdened. The unformed generation stares up at the Iron Maiden, desperately seeking guidance in the abyssal, toxic dark. The meaningless relic is finally discarded. She physically rejects the tragic legacy of her ghost limbs, actively choosing to forge a new sacrament of localized defiance. They rise from the pulverized earth not as loyal sacraments for the Empire, but as desperate survivors permanently bound by the shared agonizing bioalchemy of the trench. The iron harvest aggressively surges forward with nihilistic hunger. They seek to finalize the surgical desecration before the disorganized defenders can mount a coordinated mathematical suicide. The avatar of will advances without the omniscient doctrine. With her transhuman physiology breached, she relies solely upon the terrifying catatonic clarity of absolute survival. The lobotomized husks stall abruptly in the corrosive slurry. Their mechanized servitude completely fails without the blasphemous clerical mandates. leaving heavy ordnance abandoned in the mud. She violently reallocates the heavy instruments of annihilation. There's absolutely no logistical support, only the frantic scavenging required to heavily sustain the deafening kinetic exchange. The catastrophic collision loudly echoes through the grim labyrinth. Fragile biological systems failing under kinetic fury as they violently meet the ancient, unyielding malice. She forcefully delivers a heavy tribute of crimson upon the soil. Her adamantium wrath is fully unleashed, entirely devoid of any archaic tactical restraint. Deep within the abyssal catacombs, the agonizing bioalchemy abruptly falters. The subterranean alchemists register the chaotic anomaly, completely oblivious to the cataclysmic heresy unfolding above. The apex predator actively isolates the anomalous biological vessel. It requires her immediate erasure to physically restore the flawless mathematical precision of its endless surgical desecration. It violently launches itself through the suffocating smog, a terrifying mechanical blur heavily seeking to forcefully enforce a tragically necessary attrition upon the damned. The Iron Maiden mechanically anchors her shattered, bleeding frame. The failing biological core aggressively pumps toxic stimulants, actively preparing to absorb the impending cataclysmic impact. A deafening roar of adamantium violently shatters the local purgatory. The catastrophic kinetic fury forcefully repels the surrounding unformed generation into the freezing, corrosive sludge. Their heavy, battered forms fiercely interlock in a brutal struggle. It is a pure, nihilistic contest of kinetic fury, completely devoid of any honorable or tactical exchange. The celestial ledger critically malfunctions. The abyssal archives aggressively burn her ruined flesh. The systematic mind-wiping protocol violently failing against her profound, localized defiance. Against all calculated mathematical suicide, she forcefully repels the ancient horror. The sheer, indomitable will of the damned heavily overrides her rapidly failing transhuman physiology. The apex predator is violently trapped within the pulverized earth. The corrosive environment executes its own localized judgment upon the ancient, unyielding malice. She approaches the abyssal crater, trailing synthetic sorrow. She actively prepares to unleash a cataclysmic, localized erasure, fully embracing the ultimate martyrdom. There is absolutely no desire for survival, only the terrifying catatonic clarity required to execute a tragically necessary attrition. The abyssal void vigorously reclaims its own. A cataclysmic, localized apocalypse completely eradicates the iron predator, fulfilling the ultimate surgical desecration. The devastating shockwave violently, forcefully repels her. Her transhuman physiology is breached beyond all recognizable parameters, her heavily pulverized form crashing into the brutalist concrete. The unformed generation cautiously observes the silent wreckage. They wait for the venerable avatar of will to finally embrace the eternal void. But the omniscient mechanical core vehemently denies catharsis. The agonizing bioalchemy violently, forcefully restarts, aggressively pumping toxic stimulants to sustain the perpetual purgatory. Within the sterile bunkers, the zealot fiercely registers the blasphemous survival. The absolute failure to achieve mathematical suicide is violently perceived as an unforgivable heresy. She heavily drags her ruined vessel back to the brutalist fortifications. The fatigue of the immortal is forcefully overridden by hard-coded, unrelenting mechanized servitude. She actively integrates her shattered transhuman physiology with the cold concrete. She officially embraces her catastrophic destiny as a permanent, immovable monument of adamantium. The celestial ledger violently completely fails. The agonizing bioalchemy effectively completes the systematic mind-wiping, permanently silencing the screaming ghosts of the fallen. The heavily poisoned sky briefly parts to deliver a fresh cataclysm. The illusion of salvation aggressively descends to violently reset the planetary-scale meat grinder. There is absolutely no catharsis, only a fresh influx of human assets. The great attrition fiercely demands a newly calculated expenditure to sustain the localized purgatory. Below the pulverized earth, the subterranean alchemists aggressively resume the grim cycle. The agonizing bioalchemy forcefully repurposes the fallen to endlessly sustain the living. The newly unformed generation blindly anchors their fragile existence to the venerable Iron Maiden. They heavily prepare to actively spill their genetic vitae upon the soil. The abyssal dark violently reclaims the labyrinth. The cataclysmic roar of the eternal war fiercely echoes across the heavily shattered continents. The ancient malice aggressively returns. Fresh apex predators heavily emerge from the toxic void, vigorously demanding a newly calculated tribute of crimson. The single organic eye coldly registers the hostile proximity. All humanity is completely eradicated, forcefully leaving behind a flawless, unfeeling engine of absolute annihilation. The meaningless relics of honor are permanently swallowed by the abyss. Only the brutalism of the ditch and the unending kinetic fury remain. The Iron Maiden fires into the nihilistic void. Her mechanical core will violently never stop beating. The abyssal war will completely never end. The venerable Iron Maiden merges completely with the brutalism of the ditch. Her transhuman physiology breached beyond repair, she fully embraces absolute mechanized servitude. The new sacraments leap blindly into purgatory. They willingly offer a fresh tribute of crimson upon the soil, their biological systems failing under kinetic fury. With the celestial ledger permanently shattered, the systematic mind-wiping is finally absolute. The screaming ghosts are silenced, replaced entirely by the deafening roar of eternal carnage. The nihilistic hunger of the enemy cannot be satisfied. The ancient malice vigorously executes its surgical desecration, forcefully enforcing a tragically necessary attrition upon the damned. Her mechanical core violently denies any hope of catharsis. It relentlessly sustains the agonizing bioalchemy, vigorously forcing the shattered vessel to heavily endure the cataclysmic storm. Below the pulverized earth, the subterranean bioalchemists silently orchestrate the eternal loop. The ultimate martyrdom of the fallen efficiently fuels the horrific, hidden machinery of survival. Far removed from the visceral slaughter, the omniscient empire blesses the ongoing cataclysm. They continuously demand a calculated expenditure of human assets for their blasphemous crusade. She stands as a terrifying, tragic monument to the great attrition. Her endless survival is not a divine blessing, but a profound, unending heresy against her own mortality. Every agonizing, mechanized breath is a daily act of defiance. Yet, to be the sole survivor of 1,000 campaigns represents the absolute pinnacle of spiritual attrition. There is absolutely no final sanction. The immortal soldier completely refuses to die, forever trapped within a cataclysmic universe built entirely upon iron, toxic mud, and endless sacrifice.